Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The city was silent that evening, disturbed only by the drone of engines and the glare of streetlights reflecting off the wet asphalt. Marcus Reynolds, chief of police, was returning from a strategic meeting on law enforcement reform. His exemplary career, marked by discipline and integrity, made him a respected role model throughout the city. As he waited at the red light, a patrol car pulled up next to him. Young Officer Derek Collins, known for his arrogance and poor judgment, approached the vehicle. His eyes scanned Marcus suspiciously, and without checking his ID, he decided a routine check wasn't enough. "Get out of the vehicle," Derek ordered, his voice trembling with authority but full of contempt. Marcus slowly raised his hands, remaining calm. "Officer, I am General-in-Chief Marcus Reynolds. You may verify my identity before taking any action." But Derek, blinded by his prejudices, ignored the request. He handcuffed Marcus under the pretext that he fit the profile of a suspect. Passers-by stopped, shocked by the scene, a low-ranking officer arresting the city's highest-ranking police officer. Marcus didn't struggle. His calm and dignity highlighted the absurdity of the situation. But behind his apparent composure, a storm was brewing. This unjust arrest would quickly become a symbol of racial injustice, the abuse of power, and the fragility of the systems meant to protect. As Derek pushed Marcus toward his patrol car, one question echoed in the minds of everyone watching: who in this city could truly stand up to racism when even the highest-ranking commander could be arrested for his skin color? The sound of sirens shattered the stillness of the night as Marcus Reynolds was led into the station by Officer Derek Collins. Passers-by stood frozen, some pulling out their phones to film the scene, incredulous to see a commander-in-chief handcuffed like a mere suspect. Inside the patrol car, Marcus remained calm. He knew that losing his cool would only make the situation worse. "You know who I am, don't you?" he asked, his voice firm but calm. Derek looked at him with a mixture of defiance and misplaced superiority. "It doesn't matter who you are. Here, you're just another suspect." Marcus sighed. "You're abusing your power. I advise you to check my badge and notify your superior before this mistake costs you dearly." Collins sneered. "My superior? Do you really think your rank will protect you?" Derek's sarcasm masked his discomfort. In the back of the car, Marcus pulled out his phone and made a quick call to his deputy, Captain Olivia Martinez, an officer respected for her efficiency and integrity. "Olivia, it's Marcus. I'm being arrested by Collins downtown." "Yes, handcuffed." "No, he's refusing to check my ID." A few minutes were enough. Olivia, knowing Marcus's accuracy and authority, immediately contacted the second-in-command and ordered Collins to release Marcus or face severe punishment. Meanwhile, videos of bystanders had already begun circulating on social media. Outraged comments were multiplying. How can a police officer arrest the general-in-chief because of his skin color? At the station, Collins tried again to assert his authority, but the swift arrival of superiors and the viral spread of the incident shattered his arrogance. Marcus, always calm, knew he now had the entire city watching. What had begun as a personal abuse of power would turn into a public battle for justice and dignity. General Marcus Reynolds understood that this night would trigger a major confrontation with institutional racism, and that he would have to not only defend his honor but also show everyone that no one is above the law, including those who believe they are. The next morning, footage of the arrest was already circulating on all social media platforms. The video showed Marcus Reynolds handcuffed, impassive, facing Officer Derek Collins, who seemed to be trying to mask his embarrassment with arrogance. Outraged comments quickly multiplied. Ordinary citizens, journalists, and even respectful police officers denounced the racist and abusive act. In his office, Marcus analyzed the situation precisely. He knew that a simple internal complaint would not be enough. He had to control the narrative before Derek Collins could manipulate the version of events. He summoned his communications team and his closest deputies. Among them, Captain Olivia Martinez, a loyal and formidable strategist, became his right-hand man in this battle. "We will use transparency as a weapon," Marcus declared. "Every detail, every protocol Collins ignored will be documented. Citizens must know what really happened." They posted an official statement on the police website and social media, emphasizing Marcus's rank, his exemplary career, and the inadmissibility of the arrest. Local and national media quickly picked up the story. News networks ran live segments in which experts in law and police ethics denounced Derek Collins' behavior. Meanwhile, Collins tried to justify his actions, but every statement was contradicted by videos, witnesses, and Marcus's official badge. His arrogance was turning into panic. The second-in-command called an emergency meeting and threatened severe sanctions. For his part, Marcus remained calm, aware that this media coverage was crucial. He knew the world was watching not just an individual incident, but an illustration of systemic racism within law enforcement. Every message he shared, every intervention he made, reinforced his position. He was demanding justice not just for himself, but for all those who had been victims of injustice because of their skin color. As the hashtags #JusticeForMarcus and #StopPoliceRacism exploded on Twitter and Instagram, Derek Collins saw his power ebbing away. Marcus, impassive, was already plotting his next steps. He wouldn't just announce injustice, he would ensure it had concrete and irreversible consequences. This case was no longer just about a wrongful arrest, it was becoming the catalyst for a shift in policing, exposing the cracks in a system that was supposed to protect but sometimes oppressed. Marcus Reynolds knew he now had the whole world as witness to the truth. Derek Collins spent a restless night. The viral footage of the arrest left him with no respite. Every notification on his phone seemed like a stark reminder of his mistake. His colleagues began to whisper behind his back, and even some of his superiors were openly disapproving. At headquarters, Marcus Reynolds wasn't resting either. He knew the battle wouldn't be fought solely on social media. Derek had to answer for his actions within the legal and administrative framework. Marcus summoned his legal advisor and Captain Olivia Martinez. "We're going to file a formal complaint and request an internal investigation," Marcus explained. "But that's not all. I want Derek Collins to understand that his actions have consequences." Meanwhile, Derek attempted damage control. He emailed his superiors, explaining his distorted version of the story, but every word was quickly contradicted by video evidence and bystander testimony. Local media outlets were calling for interviews, and he knew one clumsy statement could destroy his career. The police, under public pressure, decided to suspend Derek Collins pending the investigation. It was a small triumph for Marcus, but he knew it was only a step. Derek, humiliated and angry, began looking for allies to defend his reputation, unaware that any further action would only strengthen the case against him. At the same time, Marcus received unexpected messages of support. Former colleagues, civilians, and even some police officers who had witnessed similar injustices shared their stories. Marcus understood that this case touched far beyond himself, it was becoming a symbol of the fight against institutional racism in law enforcement. Marcus and Olivia Martinez prepared a press conference. They wanted the public to understand not only the wrongful arrest, but also the systemic behavior it revealed. The world needed to see that there were leaders willing to speak out against injustice, even within the police force itself. That day marked a turning point. Derek Collins was no longer just an arrogant officer, he had become the face of a publicized abuse of power. Marcus Reynolds, on the other hand, was solidifying his role as a moral leader, using truth and transparency as weapons to transform personal humiliation into a movement for justice. The sun was rising over the city, but for Derek Collins, it brought no respite. Suspended from his duties, his arrogance was beginning to crack in the face of the fallout from his actions. The newspapers ran the headlines, "Abusive arrest of the General-in-Chief, an officer suspended," while social media exploded with messages of support for Marcus Reynolds. Every notification on Collins's phone was a cruel reminder of his wrongdoing. Meanwhile, Marcus Reynolds wasn't distracted by the tension. Together with Olivia Martinez, he implemented a comprehensive strategy, media, legal, and internal. Their goal was clear, to show that Derek Collins wasn't just acting out of ignorance, but that he reflected a broader problem of institutional racism. Marcus also convened a group of respected senior officers to prepare a press conference. They spent hours detailing the protocols ignored, documenting the arrest, and gathering testimony from civilians and police officers who had witnessed the incident. Every detail mattered, every word, every image, every piece of evidence strengthened Marcus's credibility and weakened Collins's position. At the conference, Marcus spoke calmly and authoritatively. He explained the situation without anger, but with relentless clarity. What happened yesterday was not just an isolated incident. It was a blatant violation of the law, professional ethics, and the values we represent. The journalists, impressed by Marcus's composure, asked tough questions, which he answered transparently. Olivia Martinez, at his side, confirmed every detail, emphasizing that Collins had ignored protocols and acted under the influence of racial prejudice. The fallout was immediate. Collins's reputation was ruined, not only among his colleagues, but also in the public eye. Citizens groups and civil rights organizations called for severe sanctions and a review of police practices throughout the district. Marcus, meanwhile, was preparing for the next step, the legal route. He knew that a simple internal sanction would not be enough to prevent similar incidents from occurring. He had to show that justice could be applied to everyone, even to the police officers themselves. The day struck a clear balance. Marcus Reynolds, impassive and strategic, was gaining moral power and public support. Derek Collins, arrogant and blinded by his ego, was beginning to realize that his choices had unleashed a storm from which he would not emerge unscathed. A few days after the press conference, Marcus Reynolds and his legal team went to court to file a formal complaint against Derek Collins. The action was not only aimed at obtaining compensation for Marcus personally, but also at denouncing an abuse of power and exposing systemic racism in the police force. The district attorney's office was filled with lawyers and reporters. Marcus, true to form, entered with a calm and confident posture. Olivia Martinez, still at his side, confirmed the details of the ignored protocols and the accumulated evidence. Each document presented underscored the seriousness of the offense and Collins's negligence. Collins, represented by an ambitious lawyer, tried to downplay the facts. "My client was simply acting as part of a routine check," he claimed. But every video evidence, every witness testimony, and every official protocol contradicted his claims. The tension in the room was palpable. The media broadcast the hearing live, and the public followed every detail. Peaceful protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding placards, "Justice for Marcus, Stop Police Racism." Social pressure became impossible to ignore. Marcus showed no anger. He knew that patience and precision were his best weapons. During his testimony, he calmly explained, "It's not just my honor I'm defending today. It's the dignity of all those who have been victims of injustice because of the color of their skin or their social position." The Attorney General, impressed by the strength of the case, decided to support the prosecution. Derek Collins began to feel the pressure. His career, his reputation, and even his personal life were now at stake. The superiors who had initially ignored him could no longer remain silent. At the end of the hearing, the judge ordered a thorough investigation and upheld Collins' suspension, requesting a full report on his disciplinary actions and history. Marcus left the courtroom to applause from reporters and members of the public. This initial victory was symbolic but crucial. Marcus had transformed an act of humiliation into a movement for justice and accountability. Derek Collins, who thought he could intimidate the General-in-Chief, was beginning to understand that every mistake would be paid for dearly, and that Marcus Reynolds was much more than an officer. He was a symbol of courage, perseverance, and integrity. The entire city now seemed captivated by the Marcus Reynolds case. Every newspaper, every news channel, every social media channel was reporting the story: a police commander arrested by a racist officer. Citizens, outraged, demanded justice and transparency. Derek Collins was beginning to feel the noose tightening. His once silent superiors were demanding accountability. Colleagues who had timidly supported him now regarded him with suspicion. His lawyer insisted he adopt a more conciliatory stance, but Collins, haughty as a man, refused to admit his wrongdoing. Meanwhile, Marcus Reynolds was leaving nothing to chance. Along with Olivia Martinez, he organized a strategic meeting with several respected senior police officers. Together, they decided to use the incident as leverage to strengthen ethical practices and combat institutional racism. Derek Collins is not just an individual problem, Marcus said. He represents a flaw in our system. We need to show that we will not tolerate this kind of behavior. Olivia added, we have the support of the media and the public. If we coordinate our actions properly, we can turn this case into a positive example for the entire police force. Thus a plan was put in place in several stages. 1. Dissemination of evidence. All videos and testimonies confirming the wrongful arrest would be published to ensure transparency. 2. Internal pressure. The superiors and the Collins colleagues would be questioned to reveal the flaws and responsibilities. 3. Legal action. Preparation of a solid complaint for abuse of power and institutional racism, supported by the Attorney General. 4. Public mobilization. Encourage the citizens to demand justice and support system reform policemen. Tensions reached a peak when an internal board of inquiry was convened. Collins, sitting across from the investigators, was visibly nervous. Every question, every detail, reminded him of his responsibility and the gravity of his actions. Marcus, calm and collected, watched from a distance, knowing that public and institutional pressure would converge to show that no one is above the law, not even an arrogant police officer. At the end of the day, Collins left the council more isolated and vulnerable than ever. Marcus, for his part, solidified his image as a moral and strategic leader, a man capable of transforming a humiliating act into a movement for justice and accountability. Derek Collins was beginning to feel the consequences of his actions weighing on him like an unbearable weight. His once promising career was now in ruins. Colleagues who had supported him were reluctant to stand by him, and superiors were losing patience. Every call, every email seemed to remind him that his arrogance and prejudice had unleashed a storm from which he would not emerge unscathed. Collins decided to fight to save his name. He summoned his lawyer and tried to prepare an aggressive defense, based on the idea that Marcus Reynolds, as his superior, could have influenced the incident for personal reasons. But the reality was relentless. The evidence was massive and public, the videos were circulating everywhere, and the witnesses confirmed Marcus's version. Meanwhile, Marcus Reynolds wasn't standing still. He and Olivia Martinez continued their methodical strategy. They coordinated internal and media efforts to maintain pressure. Carefully prepared interviews, public statements, and analyses of ignored protocols reinforced the impact of the case. Marcus said at a new press conference, "This is not just a case of wrongful arrest. It is a call for reform, a demonstration that racism and abuse of power cannot go unpunished." Collins, meanwhile, saw his allies drifting away and support eroding. Even his lawyer was beginning to insist on a negotiation, realizing that continuing to fight would be politically and legally suicidal. For Marcus, this situation presented an opportunity to set an example. He wasn't seeking personal revenge, but rather the strict application of justice and the demonstration that all police officers, regardless of rank, should be held accountable for their actions. The city was now watching with intense attention. Marcus and Collins's every move was analyzed, discussed, and commented on. Social media was overflowing with messages of support for Marcus and harsh criticism of Collins. Public and institutional pressure was mounting by the day. This chapter of the battle was clear: Collins was no longer in control. Marcus, impassive and strategic, was preparing the moment when the police system itself would remind everyone that no one can place themselves above the law. Tensions in the city had reached a fever pitch. Derek Collins knew his career was about to collapse, and with each passing day, his fear and isolation only increased. The media published ruthless analyses of his actions, and citizens demanded severe punishment for what they considered an unacceptable and racist act. Marcus Reynolds, however, was ready. After weeks of careful preparation with Olivia Martinez and her allies within the police force, he had gathered all the evidence, all the testimonies, and every detail necessary to ensure justice was served. The stage was set for the climactic confrontation. The police disciplinary board met to review Collins's case. Marcus, invited to testify, entered the room with his usual calm. Olivia Martinez was at his side, ready to confirm every detail. Collins, sitting opposite, tried to hide his nervousness behind a mask of arrogance, but his hands were shaking slightly. When Marcus was asked to recount the incident, he described it with precision, clarity, and composure. Every action by Collins, every violation of protocol, every racial bias was exposed. Olivia Martinez confirmed the facts, and the witnesses called to the stand unequivocally corroborated Marcus's version. Collins tried to defend himself, but every argument fell flat in the face of documentation, videos, and witness testimony. Even his lawyers seemed unable to counter the overwhelming evidence. The pressure in the room was palpable, and the board members understood that this was more than a simple conflict between colleagues, it was a matter of justice, ethics, and honor. After hours of deliberation, the disciplinary board delivered its decision. Derek Collins was dismissed from the police force, punished for abuse of power and racist behavior. The news spread immediately throughout the city and on social media. Marcus's victory was not only personal, but symbolic. It showed that even misused power could be confronted and punished. Marcus, impassive as ever, left the council to the quiet applause of some colleagues and the admiring glances of the civilians present. The battle was far from over, as this case would now serve as a benchmark for all future cases of racism and abuse of power in the police. This final confrontation established an indisputable truth: justice can prevail, dignity can be protected, and no one can place themselves above the law, even behind a uniform. After Derek Collins's dismissal, Marcus Reynolds knew his victory should not remain symbolic. The real goal was to use the case to bring about lasting change within the police force. Together with Olivia Martinez and trusted senior officers, he developed an ambitious plan for institutional reform. Their priority: increasing transparency and accountability. Marcus proposed implementing a strengthened internal oversight system, strict protocols for stops and arrests, and a mandatory training program on diversity and combating racial bias. Every officer, regardless of rank, would now be evaluated not only on their operational performance, but also on their ethics and respect for citizens. The media continued to closely follow Marcus and his actions. He gave several interviews, not to glorify himself, but to explain the importance of these reforms. His reputation as an honest and strategic leader was solidifying, and the public began to see him as a model of justice and responsibility. The now disgraced Derek Collins had become a living warning that no one escapes the consequences of their actions, especially when they strike at the heart of police and societal values. Marcus's colleagues, inspired by his behavior, began to actively support reform initiatives, creating an internal movement that went far beyond the individual case. At the same time, Marcus and Olivia worked with civic groups and civil rights experts to organize forums and workshops, involving the community in the reform process. City residents, who had witnessed the unjust arrest, actively participated, giving their opinions and contributing to the implementation of more just and inclusive policies. Marcus then understood that his mission went beyond his role as General-in-Chief. He was becoming a living symbol of the fight against racial injustice and the abuse of power, demonstrating that courage, strategy, and integrity could transform personal humiliation into positive change for all of society. Marcus's victory was no longer merely legal or moral, it was collective. The police force itself was beginning to reinvent itself, and the city watched in awe as a new era dawned, one in which justice and fairness were once again the undisputed priorities. A few months after the incident, the city had changed. The reforms implemented by Marcus Reynolds and his team had transformed the police force. Transparency, ethics, and accountability were now essential requirements for all officers. Training programs on diversity and combating institutional racism had become mandatory, and the community was actively involved in monitoring and making recommendations. Derek Collins, disgraced and discredited, left the police force in disgrace. His reputation, destroyed by his racist and abusive behavior, made it impossible for him to return to any position of authority. The media regularly chronicled his failure as an example of what happens when power is misused. Marcus, for his part, was recognized not only as an exceptional leader, but as a symbol of justice and courage. His calm, strategy, and integrity had helped transform a personal humiliation into a citywide reform movement. At a public ceremony, citizens and officers gathered to celebrate the reforms. Marcus delivered a sober but powerful speech. This victory is not just mine. It belongs to all those who have been victims of injustice, to those who believe in human dignity, and to those who refuse to turn a blind eye to racism and the abuse of power. Together, we have shown that justice can triumph. Applause erupted, and the crowd rose in respect. Olivia Martinez, at his side, smiled, proud of their collective work. The city had learned that strength lay not only in authority or rank, but in truth, transparency, and moral courage. Marcus Reynolds knew the road to full justice was still long, but he had planted a seed of change that would continue to grow. His battle had proven that even in the face of injustice and prejudice, perseverance and strategy could transform oppression into progress. Thus ended the chapter of a humiliation that had become legend. A wrongly arrested general-in-chief had not only defended his honor, but had also left a lasting legacy of justice, responsibility, and integrity for his city and for the entire police force.